recording.
Well, that was weird. That almost sounded like Holly's voice for a second.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yes. It is you, isn't it?
It is. I like to moonlight as a Zoom announcer.
Voiceover talent. Well, it's on the agenda. Did Libor show up? I pinged him on Slack a little last week and I didn't get a response. So I think he might be, maybe he's, I don't know. Let's skip that. So now we can follow each other in Gitlab. And I was really excited about this feature because I used to have this workaround where I subscribe to people's activity feeds in an RSS reader, which was a really wonky solution, and it costs $5 a month. And so it's really cool. It's a community contribution. Libor did show up, and I made a feedback issue for it. So if you start using the follow each other thing, and you're like, well, this could be better, then drop the feedback in there. I don't know if the community contributor is going to be watching that feedback issue, but I'll definitely ping him in it. I just realized I didn't ping him in it. Might be a good idea to do that. He's a developer from Siemens. Libor.
Was there any, well,
sorry, I'm moving on.
Yeah.
Yes, anything else about that?
I was just wondering, like, was there validation done on that or anything like that, or was there UX input there?
I don't know. Austin, did you say that you put some input into it?
Yeah, I put a little bit of feedback on there. It was mostly just making sure they're using the right components, rather than like validating, is this like the right place for this? Is it the right page? Just trying to get the community contributors' idea in the product. It is additive for sure. There might be a better opportunity to move it elsewhere, but as Mike has highlighted, it does solve a unique pain point. And now that we actually have it, we can gather some useful feedback on how to make it better.
I agree. I was kind of impressed at the speed in which it, something happened. It was a fairly, not a large change, but it like feels like a large change because I think it's such an improvement. But sometimes I get a little jealous of community contributors. I think I'm like, oh man, he just like went through and did it so fast. That's awesome. I don't know. Do y'all feel the same way?
Yes, definitely.
I think they did keep it as minimal as possible while still making it like useful and usable. The more I use it, the more I'm like, oh, when I see the list of people that follow me, I'd like to see if I follow them or not. But I can also I can go to another place to see that. I don't have to see that in a single view. Yeah, around, why are you curious, Alexis, if we had validation on it?
Just for that reason, it went by, like I didn't really see any chatter around it, and it went through. I mean, it felt like quickly to me, I guess, because I had no idea it was happening, but just kind of wondering how that works. I think it's a good improvement though, and I think the feedback issue is a smart way to improve on it.
Yeah, it was really quick because I was tagged saying, hey, what do you think about this? Because it's kind of like an access thing. And I was like, I don't know. I never heard of this, never seen this. I don't know anything about it. And they said, yeah, it's a community contribution and it's done. It's going to go on the next milestone. I was like, okay, cool. So, yeah.
I did think the contributor did a good job highlighting where it is in other products like GitHub. So at least there was a competitive demonstration of another platform like us has this model. Therefore, I want this model in GitLab. So I have a reason to not use the other one. So I thought at least that was good evidence as a sensing mechanism.
Yeah, I had a bunch of like follow-up questions like, what about this? What about this? And it's like, oh yeah, it's here, it's here, it's here. I'm like, okay, so you've done all of the work or the research or the planning. But yeah, as far as an MVC, I think it would be fine. And then we could just iterate off of feedback session now, see what we think.
Yeah. It's
That's
exciting.
awesome that y'all saw it and had input. I was just kind of worried, like, do things ever go through that we don't see? And it kind of sounds like, nope. So awesome.
Well, maybe. And that's why I'm working on trying to get a merge request in for getting UX added to DangerBot, because it specifically will call out front end, back end, database and stuff, but there's no call out for UX. So I'm hoping once I can get some more engineering input, which I'm already getting some really great ideas, we'll actually be able to recommend, like, hey, you should tag Nick because he has expertise in this area and he can provide some input.
No, that's an awesome idea. I saw that, Austin, and I was like, yes, I love it. If you need help, let me know, because I've been thinking about that too. So it's a really good solution.
The biggest help is figuring out how to have our like YAML structure, because it doesn't fit the existing model. So the engineers are kind of going back and forth on like, what should we do here? What's the scalable model that we can build and use this for other areas? So I'm kind of
Have
letting
them
that play out.
just say it's a community contribution and you need to get it done in like a week.
Yeah, create a fake GitLab account.
I'll just use my personal GitLab account.
I want to make sure we welcome Libor. I'm super happy to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me, Mike, for and Alexis, the first one. Yeah, I'm going to be joining hopefully these on a recurring basis now, since Ecosystem now inherited the Jira importer from Plan. I've been noticing more and more there's a lot of interesting overlaps. So I just want to make sure that we're not duplicating work and just aligning on Plan strategy and understanding. And then vice versa, I'll share out once I have any new things in Ecosystem coming up that might be relevant to Plan, I'll share. So thanks for this, Mike. Yeah, excited to be here and excited to hear what you all are working on.
It's a good way to ensure that our Jira integration and our Plan capabilities in GitLab are lining up in ways that provide more value, for sure. Yeah. Daniel, get the next step.
Yeah, so the OKR, I was wondering what else or what everyone else was doing, because when I spoke with Mike on our one-on-one, my initial plan, which is okay, grab some UI polish issues, which like, okay, easy. And Dennis said that's not exactly accurate, because I went and looked at this link there and it says visibility of system status for dev. I'm like, what does that mean? And so Mike had some suggestions. I spoke with Dennis and we had picked some out. So I put them in the issue for the one that's linked above there.
Cool. Are you finding, Daniel, that there's existing issues that sort of fit this criteria of system visibility?
Yeah, I think like after I spoke with Dennis and had some, kind of poking into them and seeing a little bit more about it, it was less confusing rather than just something as simple as UI polish. And it's like, oh, fix this. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's easy. I think it's harder to understand what visibility of system status means, at least from a level of access, because access is, did you get in or are you not in? That's more or less the visibility that you see for access. Everything else is kind of architectural and not so much a system status.
Yeah, some of it too is, how often have you given input to the system and you're like, well, nothing's happening. And then boom, something happens. You're like, well, transition would have been nice, or some kind of, the spinner or whatever. That could also be visibility system status. It's like, what's happening? And letting the user know that something is happening. And then after it happens, what happened? There was something I saw recently that we didn't give like an alert that something had updated, and I made a note of it. Can't remember where it was. So yeah, they're all over the place in our product. As we dog food it, we'll discover them, and if there's no issue, you can make an issue and tag it with the label too.
It might have been mine, Mike, and that brings up a good question. So I'm working on like imports and exports, and something you identified was just something we hadn't worked on yet. It was like the next iteration. Would I tag that as part of this OKR, given that it's a new feature that I'm fleshing out? Or
Yeah.
I would assume no, right? Okay, cool, good to know. So as we build out iterations of something new, we could say that's part of the OKR as well.
Usability is always critical, even for something, you know, that's deemed minimal, because it affects like the learnability of it, right, and the adoption of it and the trust. Like I think Austin just put there from the NNG side, it trusts helps us trust the brand. Yeah, usability applies at any stage of an idea.
So it's not
you overcycle and go outside of the scope of MVC. That's always, you know, the question, I guess. Is I think we get as close as we could with as little effort as we could, you know.
But don't think of it like debt, like we're having to identify opportunities that, you know, we missed or that we're adding to. It could be anything, even if it's a new feature.
Yeah, it could be
awesome.
It could be a UX debt issue too, and you just label it with the SUS KR label. The most important thing from like labeling it from that perspective is that it can be counted and we can measure how well we're executing through usability improvements. So yeah, but it could be at any stage. The idea, minimal, existing, could be an issue that's been laying around for 4 years. Those are the really good ones to take on. I think Holly, you have the next point under the OKR.
Just that I posted a couple of the ones that I've identified recently, just in case you want to see maybe some other examples, Daniel, if that would be helpful. One of them I opened actually the other day when I realized that we put out iterations, but for some reason, the left sidebar doesn't expand and show kind of where you are within the issues section on all parts of iterations. Like it shows when you're in the report view, I think within groups, but not the list view within groups and not the list or report view within projects for iterations. So that to me seemed like a great way to help the user understand kind of where they are in the product by having it selected. Plus it's a pattern that we've already defined. So it made sense to me to go ahead and open that up. But that's just kind of an example of how I interpret the system status. I think to Mike's point, and then also to what Austin had posted from NN Group, that there are lots of ways you could do it, but that's just one of the ways that I interpret it.
That's a good one. Yep.
Looks like maybe Austin has the next point, or maybe you've already touched on it.
I mean, it's the similar things that you're saying, Holly, just to share some ideas of what compliance is focusing on. But to answer your initial question, how are we working on it? It's mostly just been me digging through our old issues lists and trying to identify opportunities and talking with Dennis about them. So I've spent a good bit of my time kind of refining and prioritizing some design work around those opportunities so that we can have a more productive discussion about how we can break it down further. Alexis?
I was just saying, I just did a read only, just saying that if you're building something out and the next iteration is like a small usability addition, then even if it was already planned, just label it for the OKR.
Perfect. So if nothing else there, Daniel, we can move on to Amanda's.
Amanda?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering from you all, like, what did you start with? What artifacts when compiling your 1 to 3 year vision? And Daniel, I'm most curious about your mural board. Like, how did you begin that?
I copied somebody else's mural board, and I spoke with my PM and kind of explained what they were doing, and also looked at that issue that Nadia had made a while back to try and get like an idea, like just a general understanding of how to approach it.
Okay.
And then my PM already had like a bunch of stuff that we had been thinking about, especially like, for example, the merging groups and projects. So that's obviously going to be something that's really high priority, and it's going to be a large project. But as far as the 3-year long-term vision, I'm still kind of talking about that. But in terms of how we started, that's how it went.
Okay. Yeah, I saw Nadia's the link you shared to her issue, and I haven't read it yet. I will.
Yeah, I'll just, oh, please, go ahead.
Okay. I was gonna say, for me, I don't have a 3-year vision issue that I'm collaborating with Matt on. He has a lot of like epics broken down, which for better or worse has created some, lingering artifacts that we have to manage and keep updated. To me, like, the ideal world is I can use epic boards to illustrate a roadmap of what we're going to try and focus on for the year. I feel like that would be more lightweight. And then to me, I think it makes sense to keep the 3-year plan as like a paragraph within a direction page. The point where I get confused is when I see a 3-year issue and then the 3-year direction, and then like, which one of these is the single source of truth? Because I would rather see discussion happen in a merge request for that handbook page as opposed to doing it in an issue. But then, maybe it's just personal preference. But that's my project manager hat speaking. So
Cool. Thank you.
For the purpose
add
of
to that,
transparency, the handbook is best. Go ahead, Nick.
To add to that, I think I've seen a correlation between the level of ability to communicate the 3-year vision versus the maturity of the aggregate maturity of all the categories in which your stage group covers. So compliance, analytic, or optimize, whatever, we all very minimal categories, still trying to find product market fit. So the ability to stretch out to 3 years becomes less and less feasible the closer to minimal you get. So that's sort of the trend that I see. So with my team, all I can do is 1 year max, and that's sort of the general thing that we're doing with Drift. Like, we can have big lofty things of GitLab will be the single place where you find all your insights and stuff, but you can't really provide any sort of tangible direction with further past that.
And is
Yeah,
your I'm sorry,
No, please go ahead.
Nick, is your category vision, is that in the handbook? Or no, that's
Yeah.
Okay.
There's an MR for it, which is currently just in review at the moment with my PM, which we're updating VS value stream management for. It was quite verbose before, but yeah, got a MR on that, so I can share that MR right now. You can see the changes in the way that we've structured it.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, just to kind of expand on what Daniel and Nick were saying, I also kind of started with someone else's board and just kind of tweaked it and made it my own, and have just been working with my PM. Kristen also jumped in and gave us some feedback on some things the other day, but it's been really helpful. And also, to Nick's point, we felt that the 3-year plan, even though project management in particular, I think has a lot of opportunity to grow, we felt 3 years was going to be a little too far out. So we just, landed on 1 year, but we're kind of breaking it down by what we're working on immediately, what we want to try to accomplish in the next 3 to 6 months, and then kind of a longer term vision.
Have y'all, question, I just kind of added the same stuff. Have y'all been working on your category maturity, like epics? Because that's something I need to go through and refine with my PM, because I've had a new PM, like 3 new PMs recently, and those are all kind of like wacky. Do y'all have those nailed down and refined? Do you know exactly what you need to do to get to the next category maturity? Because I think that's important. How are y'all doing there? Great.
I can just say that I empathize with you. I've had plenty of different PMs in the last few in the time that I've been here. So there's
You know how to.
definitely some overlap and also pivots, which make it quite difficult to manage epics. But I think as like a consistent person within the team, I find that I can tend to start providing context for my PM and do that by like doing the direction pages as well as structuring some of the epics myself, because I find that as great as PMs are for getting stuff done, I think that you probably have a little bit more context as to how stuff is structured. So it might be worth you starting to do it yourself, which is what I've been doing.
That's a good point. I guess it kind of depends on the PM and how hands-on they are, right? But that's awesome. Also, I don't know, 3-year vision, I kind of just asked, I don't know if I should say this in a recording, but in general, I was like, what is the point of a 3-year vision, especially if the team has a hard time kind of like planning 1 year sometimes, it seems, right? And I guess just strategy-wise, like being ambitious helps with like resourcing and getting people excited about the future of your stage, things like that. Just like less tangible things are also important, if that makes sense. And Nick, you've been in this role in an interim capacity, so you probably understand that a little bit more. But just like the excitement and the advocating for your team's resources is also important, and that's like one of the main things of a 3-year vision as well. I see you nodding. What do you think?
And also like dependency planning as well. So for example, within the value stream management category, there's lots of things around like custom workflow stages where there's overlap between what we see going forward and what the plan team sees going forward as well. So where there's like potential for overlap in the vision over the next few years, I think by defining that and saying this may happen further out, I think that helps to get teams ready to sort of figure out how they collaborate as well.
Awesome. I'll add that later, but I don't never know how to like edit Google Docs without editing the person already typing. But anyway, I'll add that later, y'all. Good point. Thank you. Austin, I think you have the next point.
I just want to say really quickly, in 3-year vision, that should largely be directed by your jobs to be done. And if your jobs to be done are too low level, then it's difficult to say, well, what are we doing for the next 3 years to make this job possible or better? Then the 3-year vision exercise might actually help us have more refined and better jobs stories that aren't too low level, if that makes sense. But for the category maturity, it's very important to have jobs to be done before you embark on that again, or for the first time for some of you. Having jobs to be done that are reviewed by research, by as many people as possible, really.
Yeah, I know we've talked about too that compliance job to be done are probably too low level, and we need to articulate them at a higher level. And then we just get stuck in this like paradigm of like trying to solve these low level problems that people have in GitLab with these bigger jobs, and it can sometimes be hard to connect the dots.
Yeah.
I think ours are too high level.
User story. A lot of people are at the user story level. Their jobs, user stories are appropriate for the more tactical things, like what people do in the product. Why they do it is the job level.
Yeah. I was going to say, in terms of like keeping maturity epics, sometimes I have found it challenging to understand how how others are mapping their epics and issues. Because it's like, let's say I have a feature to improve SSH keys. Does that map to the category maturity epic to move this group to viable from minimal, or does it map to the other epic, which is towards like an OKR to improve the sus score? And it's like you can only map to one epic at a time, so then you have to pick one or the other, which then makes some epics incomplete, or they have to like reference them in some other way. And so then it becomes this hard thing to manage, which is why I was saying, it's like there are some just gathering dust, because while we're trying to move a specific feature set probably into a viable state, it's sometimes hard to map everything back to that epic because it's mapping somewhere else.
We'll probably have a whole meeting about this one. Wait, do you want to do the next topic, Austin, about the lead generation tool?
Yeah, sure. So I'll share my screen for this one. Could be a little bit easier to talk about that way. No, not whiteboard. I don't want to whiteboard.
Why not?
It's picking the first option as whiteboard, and I just wasn't ready for it to do that. Because I don't think it would demonstrate what I was trying to get at. Okay, so a long time ago, before I ever joined GitLab, there was this feature added to, I think it was self-managed instances, but you could get like an instance review. So this gave Jeremy the idea of, we should do this for compliance because that will drive up usage. And so he was encouraging us to think of a way to create like a lead generation tool for the sales team to understand, like, here are organizations that are clicking in this area or might be interested in this feature so that we can sell them on it. I was curious if any of you had run across that in your own groups or other areas of the product. I was exploring some ideas, like being able to get the report one time, but I was curious what your thoughts were.
Have you talked with the growth team at all?
No, that's a great idea.
Because I feel like anything I've done touching this sort of area, I've been talking with like Matei or Kevin. I think they could help.
I will do that. Thank you.
I definitely talk with Matei and Jackie.
And then if you don't mind, yeah. And then if you don't mind, I'd love to hear maybe a follow-up when you do hear from them, because I'm curious. I haven't seen anything like this personally, but I think it's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, there are some random parts, like there are areas of the product that encourage you to use like auto DevOps, which might require you to have like a specific tier. I can't quite remember. There are some random places that I've seen it, but yeah, I haven't really seen any as direct as this one, which was more of a salesy effort where they were going to follow up with you if you used it, which made me feel weird. I was like, I don't know if we should force people into that, but anyway, yeah, I'll follow up. I don't know who had the next point, but GDK help?
Yeah, so I was going to ask if anybody knew of another way apart from tagging Stan Who, because I feel that's the only way to get an answer in that channel. But I don't want to explicitly go out and say, poke, 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 hey.
There's also a GitPod channel. And I think some of the GitPod team members might actually be in it too. Don't quote me on that.
Or, I mean, do you have an engineer that's awake right now on your team that you could talk to? That's what I do as last resort.
I don't, but I'll try the GitPod channel.
I'm happy to take a stab at whatever the problem is. I've run into a bazillion GDK problems over the past year and a half and have had a lot of learnings. I can't make any promises, but I'm happy to try. But I usually have success in the GDK channel. And then of course, we've talked about GitPod and the benefits of it. Personally, I bounce back and forth between the two because sometimes something works in one and not the other, and it never seems to consistently work in both every single time for me. But I think that they're still working out the kinks with GitPod.
What does make bootstrap do, Daniel? I'm looking at your command that you issued.
I have no idea. Like anytime they tell me to do anything in the code, I'm like, sure, whatever you say.
Who told you to do make bootstrap? Was it like in docs or something?
Yeah, it was part of the instructions.
Huh.
That's Ash said also try doing that.
The nice thing about Gitpod is you don't have to worry about dependencies on your local machine. And yeah, I'm curious, Holly, why do you use GDK sometimes?
Because I still sometimes have trouble with Gitpod. I've been working closely with Marcel and Mike Nichols, who I think also had a good bit of experience with Gitpod in the past when I do run into problems. But a couple of areas were like, there were more kind of edge cases potentially, like where I needed a specific license and there were challenges in getting the license implemented, or being able to access Gitpod for community contributions where they've made a fork. And so like kind of things that were just a little out of the norm. And sometimes I would get error messages, but it would work in GDK. So in the effort of not spending half a day to get one MR approved, I would just end up bouncing back and forth between the two. I think the Gitpod is great and it works most of the time. But once in a while, I'll run into something weird where I need to revert back to GDK, or at least it seems like I need to for the sake of time. Maybe I don't.
And most
But
of
I
the
am
time,
trying.
You need it,
most of the
like
time,
editing
Gitpod is
YAML files.
the default.
Yeah.
Use Gitpod first, though, right? Okay.
Yeah, I try to use Gitpod first, but I think to Alexis's point, it does take a second sometimes. So there's a little bit of slowness, but I power through that and do try to give the feedback that I have to Mike and Marcel, or at least Marcel. I mean, is that the right place?
Yeah.
Is there
In the Gitpod channel, right?
No, I've been, well, sometimes in the Gitpod channel, sometimes I contact them directly if I have a specific question, but
Oh yeah,
yes,
if you do
I
it in
will
a public channel, then we can all
Yes.
benefit from the solution. I
I
think we're
agree.
way over time. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.